is, oh God, and yet another acronym, yeah. Yes, it's called TEEB, and it's only because it's shorter than, shorter than the long name. It is about the economics, but I'd like to begin my comment on that by showing how it's beyond the economics. Because the global commons called fisheries are very important. Now, everyone is aware, and there's a lot of studies by the FAO and other groups, that fisheries are being depleted, that something of the order of 3/4 of global fisheries are already either fully fished or overfished, and the remaining quarter are under risk of becoming like the rest. 1/4 of the fisheries are actually overfished. We are also aware that the subsidies to trawler fleets to enable them to renovate and therefore fish further and fish deeper are one of the main causes of this excessive depletion of fish stock in global fisheries. We also know that those subsidies are between $20 and $30 billion per annum, which is almost a third of the total volume of the fish industry, which is about $100 billion, $90 to $100 billion. So the first point is that yes, global GDP would be affected by $90 to $100 billion if in 40 years' time, as most of the studies predict, there were no more fish to fish. We are fishing down the food chain. You know, it's going from big to medium to small to a point where we would all have to chase, plankton or compete with the whales or eat jellyfish or other such things which don't particularly look good on the table. But it's beyond the $100 billion of industry that would be lost, because tied up with this industry is 27 million jobs. And these are not jobs, as it happens, of the trawler fisher folk, but rather of the coastal fisheries, of the coastal poor who depend upon fishery for their livelihood and their sustenance. I still remember and will never forget the words of a gentleman who shared one panel in the Netherlands with us, who said that, you know, it's all very well for you in Europe to stop your trawlers from fishing off your coast, but when they come down to Western Africa and they fish there, then my canoes come home empty. So those are the 27 million people. It's their livelihoods. It's not just, you know, incremental to them. It's absolutely all their wealth and their living. But the story doesn't end there, because it's not just the economics, it's not just the jobs, but these fisheries and fish provide the main source of animal protein for 1 billion people in the developing world. So absent the fish from which they derive this protein, we have the biggest incipient health problem that I can think of. Who is going to look after the health of 1 billion poor if natural resource fish, in other words, are not giving them the right dietary conditions? The connection between poverty and public assets, the connection between nature as the main provider of public assets and the flow of goods and services, can be seen in each and every one of the Millennium Development Goals. And whenever I speak about the MDGs, which we are all focused on, I speak not of MDG 7, which is about the environment, but all the others. Haiti is a classic case in point, where deforestation has resulted in a cycle of floods and droughts. From almost fully forested, the land is now under 4% forest cover. So you have got MDG 1 not possible because productivity of the land, because of the cycle of floods and droughts, is too low. The Avezak reservoir effectively became unusable in more than half the area that it was supposed to cover within a few years of its construction. We have problems with child health as well, because water unfiltered and stagnant is what is being fed. And more than 90% of Haiti's children suffer from chronic intestinal problems. And that's really a sad statement. So neither can you get MDG 1, poverty, nor MDG 8, development, nor MDG 5, women's health, nor MDG 4, child's health. So where's the question of MDG 7? The real problem is all of these are connected. And the baseline that we're talking about here is nature and the destruction of natural capital. So sorry about this. It's my bane of my life is these blackberries. The other point I wanted to make is that the connection between the wealth of the poor and its bad maintenance or its lack of maintenance is sometimes lost, because everyone's looking at averages like GDP. GDP is a glorious average. It tells you what is the average increase in goods and services produced by a country. But if we look at the benefits from ecosystems, and that's what our study does and values them, and we come to some answer, let's say in the case of China 10% or India 7.3% of GDP, we have to go one step further. We have to ask, to whom did these benefits flow? And then you have to ask questions like, all right, so who benefits from flood prevention and drought control? Who benefits? It's the poor farmer. Who benefits from the flow of nutrients and water from the forest to the aquifers to the field? It's the poor farmer. And who would lose if these benefits were lost? It's the poor farmer again. So when you recast the questions properly and look at to whom do the benefits flow, you come to the conclusion it is actually to subsistence farmers, it is to those who are doing animal husbandry, those who depend on forests for non-timber forest products. So really we are talking about the GDP of the poor. Now in one of the examples in my old study in India, that's just the Green Indian States Trust, we had these numbers and we reworked them for the TEEB. And we came to the startling answer that if you look at to whom do the benefits flow, the cost of losing all ecosystem services is not 7.3% of GDP, it's 57% of the GDP of the poor. And that's the staggering answer. And that's where the economics really has to be sharply focused in terms of who are the poor, what is their wealth, what are we doing to look after it. And these are the numbers that I think we need to really worry about. Of their GDP, yes, is basically free flows from nature. Yeah. And what would they do without these flows? It would really be, you are putting them into a poverty trap which is completely inextricable. You cannot really escape that. RED, as REDD, as Julia mentioned, apart from another four-letter word, is actually quite an interesting bundle of opportunities. I'm among the doubters, if you like, that I really worry about what will be achieved in Copenhagen in terms of the main agreement. I see negotiators coming to the table without a common human understanding of the problem. The rich world negotiators not really seeing the true impacts of energy poverty, and the poor world negotiators not really accepting that there is a low carbon path towards prosperity. And my experience is always when people come to the table, no matter how well defined and how clearly stated the guidelines are, and they are well stated in terms of UNFCCC, but if they don't come with a common human understanding of a problem, then you don't end up with a solution. So I would actually vote for RED as perhaps the dark horse in Copenhagen. And I would put all my eggs in that basket. If there were shares in RED, I would be buying them. And I think it's important in RED to understand that the indigenous peoples and the local communities, the so-called IPs and LCs, are absolutely vital players. I see the beneficiaries of RED as obviously the forest-rich countries with high or some deforestation, or in some cases no deforestation if you accept the broader RED. But basically I see three layers of beneficiaries. There's the sovereign, there's the state government, the one who is really looking after the local environment, the Amazonas state in Brazil, or the district who is looking after that particular forest. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, the local community. Because without their engagement and without their participation and their acceptance, nothing worthwhile will be achieved out here. And I think that's the risk as well as the opportunity. So there are several, I won't bore you with the details, but I can, pause there. But there's a lot that can be, we can come back to RED if anyone wants to, but there's a big opportunity there. And I'd like to say that I hope it succeeds. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, let me pass straight to you, Mattis, so that you can open up.
Thank you, David. Yeah. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Such an illustrious group. At Global Footprint Network, we start from the question, how big is the commons? How much nature do we have and how much do we use? Because a farmer wants to know how big his or her farm is. Why shouldn't we know as an economy how much it takes to support us? And that's why we developed the ecological footprint as a way to compare how much nature there is and how much we use. And our goal actually is to say we want to have 10 nations at least by 2015 that use ecological service accounting as rigorously as they do now with GDP, because as we move into a resource-constrained future, ecological assets will become ever more significant to maintain your economic success, as Pavan has pointed out very effectively. Now, when we look at time trends of most countries, I mean probably 99% of all countries, what we see is that resource demand, compound resource demand, which is multiplied by how many people, how much being consumed, goes up overall, while ecosystems are more and more constrained. And climate change is a big piece of it, obviously, particularly in wealthy countries. The climate part is very, very large, not so large in poorer